The silver fork trembled in Marcus Blackwell's hand as he brought the first bite to his lips. The billionaire's eyes widened, his jaw slackened, and for the first time in 20 years, tears streamed down his face. This is impossible, he whispered, staring at the beautiful woman standing before him in her simple white apron. How do you know this recipe? Before we continue, if you enjoy incredible stories of love, loss, and second chances, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. 3 days earlier, Marcus Blackwell sat in his 40-story Manhattan penthouse, surrounded by luxury that most people could only dream of. Persian rugs worth more than houses, paintings by masters long dead, and a view of Central Park that cost him $30 million. But none of it mattered. The 60-year-old tech mogul hadn't smiled in 2 decades, not since the accident that took everything that truly mattered to him. His assistant knocked softly. "Sir, the new chef is here for the interview." Marcus didn't look up from his laptop. "Send them to the kitchen. Same rules as always. No personal questions, no conversation beyond what's necessary for the job, and they cook one dish. If I don't finish it, they're gone." 23 chefs had tried and failed in the past 6 months. Marcus had no patience for small talk or emotional connections. Food was fuel, nothing more. His previous chef had quit after Marcus barely touched a single meal in 3 months, claiming it was soul-crushing to cook for someone who had forgotten how to feel. But when Sophia Claire walked into his kitchen, something shifted in the air. She was 28, with warm honey-colored eyes and auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her movements were graceful, yet confident as she surveyed the state-of-the-art kitchen that most professional chefs would kill for. "Mr. Blackwell will be down shortly," the assistant informed her. "You have 1 hour to prepare whatever you think. We'll impress him. Most don't last 30 minutes. Sophia nodded, rolling up her sleeves. "I only cook, sir, but I cook with everything I have." She opened her worn leather bag and pulled out a small glass jar filled with what looked like ordinary herbs and spices. But as she opened it, the entire kitchen filled with an aroma that seemed to carry memories within it: warmth, love, Sunday mornings, and the laughter of children. Marcus entered the kitchen exactly 1 hour later, his expression cold and businesslike. He'd built his fortune by being ruthless, calculating, and emotionally detached. After the accident, those qualities had become his armor against a world that had taken his wife Sarah and their daughter Emma in a single devastating moment. "What did you make?" he asked without looking at Sophia. "Coq au vin," she replied, simply. "But not the way most people know it." Marcus sat at the kitchen island, his movements mechanical. He'd tasted this dish hundreds of times at high-end restaurants around the world. French cuisine held no surprises for him anymore. Nothing did. But as Sophia placed the plate before him, he noticed something unusual. The presentation wasn't elaborate or pretentious like the dishes his previous chefs had tried to impress him with. Instead, it was simple, almost homely, but there was something about the way the sauce caught the light, the way the herbs were arranged, that spoke of genuine care rather than mere technique. "The recipe," Sophia said quietly, "belonged to my grandmother. She came from a small village in Provence, but she perfected it during the war years, when ingredients were scarce and hope was scarcer. She always said that the secret wasn't in the wine or the chicken, but in cooking with love for someone who needed to remember how to feel." Marcus picked up his fork, annoyed by her unnecessary commentary. He'd specifically requested no personal stories, no attempts to connect. He just wanted to eat and get this interview over with, so he could return to his isolated world of profit margins and board meetings. The moment the food touched his tongue, everything changed. The flavors weren't just exquisite, they were familiar in a way that defied logic. The sauce had a depth that spoke of hours of patient simmering, but there were subtle notes he recognized, traces of herbs and techniques that triggered memories he'd buried so deep he thought they'd died with his family. His hand began to shake as he took another bite, then another. Each flavor seemed to unlock a door he'd sealed shut 20 years ago. He could almost hear Sarah's laughter from their tiny first apartment, where she'd attempted this exact dish for their 3rd anniversary. She'd burned it slightly, but they'd eaten every bite while sitting on the floor, because they couldn't afford a proper dining table. Yet. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "My grandmother raised me after my parents died in a car crash when I was 8, Sophia replied, watching his face carefully. "She taught me that food is the language of the heart when words aren't enough. Every dish tells a story, carries a piece of someone's soul." Marcus set down his fork, his hands trembling. "This recipe, the way you've prepared the herbs, the exact balance of the wine, reduction, it's identical to something my wife used to make, but that's impossible. She learned it from her grandmother, who died before we met. There's no way you could know." Sophia reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a faded photograph, placing it gently on the counter beside his plate. Marcus's world tilted on its axis as he stared at the image. Two elderly women standing together in what looked like a refugee camp kitchen, both wearing the same gentle smile, both holding wooden spoons. "Your wife's grandmother was Marie Dubois," Sophia said softly. "My grandmother was Claire Dubois. They were sisters, separated during the war when my grandmother fled to America with the resistance. They never saw each other again, but they both carried the same recipes, the same techniques, the same belief that food could heal what seemed broken beyond repair." The fork clattered to the floor as Marcus pushed back from the counter, his carefully constructed walls crumbling like paper in the rain. That's not possible. Sarah never mentioned... She never knew." "She wouldn't have known," Sophia continued, her voice gentle but firm. "The sisters were separated when Marie was only 16. Claire spent her whole life in New York, working in small restaurants, always wondering what happened to the sister she left behind. She kept the recipes alive, hoping someday she might find her again. She passed them to me with one instruction. If I ever met someone who needed to remember how to feel, I should cook with everything I had." Marcus stared at the photograph, then back at Sophia. The resemblance was unmistakable now that he knew what to look for. The same gentle eyes, the same graceful way of moving her hands, the same intuitive understanding of how flavors could carry emotions. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why now?" Sophia met his gaze steadily. "Because my grandmother made me promise something before she died last year. She said there was a man somewhere who had forgotten how to live, who had built walls so high around his heart that he couldn't remember what love tasted like. She said when I found him, I would know, and I had to cook for him the way she would have cooked for her lost sister." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the city. "I don't need saving. I don't need anyone trying to fix me or bring back memories that are better left buried. I just need someone who can cook decent food and stay out of my way." But even as he spoke the words, he could feel them losing their power. The taste of the coq au vin lingered on his tongue like a promise, like Sarah's voice whispering that it was time to stop running from life. "I'm not here to save you, Mr. Blackwell," Sophia said, beginning to clean up her cooking station with practiced efficiency. "I'm here to cook. That's what I do. But I won't apologize for cooking with love, even if you're not ready to taste it yet." Marcus turned back to face her, studying this woman who had somehow cracked open his carefully sealed world with a single dish. "If I hire you, there will be rules. No more stories about grandmothers or lost sisters. No attempts to psychoanalyze me or force me to feel things I'm not ready to feel. Just cook, serve the food, and leave me alone." Sophia nodded, though her eyes held a warmth that made his chest tighten. "I only cook, sir. But I won't cook without putting my heart into it. If that's something you can't accept, then perhaps you need a different kind of chef." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the kitchen island. Marcus could feel something shifting inside him, like ice beginning to crack after a long winter. A part of him wanted to send her away, to maintain the safe numbness he'd cultivated for 2 decades. But another part, a part he'd thought was dead, was hungry for whatever it was she'd awakened with, that single impossible dish. "Fine," he said finally. "You start tomorrow. Breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 8. No deviation from the schedule, no attempts at conversation during meals, and absolutely no more stories about the past." Sophia gathered her things, pausing only to slide the photograph back into her apron pocket. "I understand, Mr. Blackwell. Though I should mention, my grandmother's recipes all come with stories. They're inseparable. I can't cook her food without carrying her. Memories." After she left, Marcus sat alone in his kitchen for hours, staring at the empty plate that had somehow contained more emotion than he'd allowed himself to feel in 20 years. He could still taste the echoes of Sarah's laughter, feel the ghost of Emma's small hand tugging on his sleeve as she begged him to tell her stories about the grandmother she'd never met. That night, for the first time since the accident, Marcus dreamed of something other than twisted metal and flashing lights. He dreamed of a small apartment filled with the aroma of herbs and wine, of Sarah's flour-dusted hands as she tried to recreate her grandmother's recipes, of the promise he'd made to always protect their small family's happiness. The next morning, Sophia arrived precisely at 6:30, her worn leather bag in hand and the same quiet confidence in her movements. She moved through Marcus's kitchen like she'd been cooking there for years, pulling ingredients from the massive refrigerator with an intuitive understanding of what belonged together. Marcus appeared at exactly 7, dressed in his usual impeccable suit, his expression carefully neutral. But Sophia noticed the way his eyes lingered on the kitchen counter where the photograph had been, the way his breathing changed slightly when he caught the aroma of whatever she was preparing. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwell," she said without looking up from the stove. "I hope you slept well." He grunted noncommittally, taking his usual seat at the kitchen island. He'd eaten breakfast at the same spot for 10 years, usually consuming whatever his previous chefs had prepared without really tasting it, his attention focused on his phone or laptop. But today, he found himself watching Sophia's hands as she worked, noting the way she seasoned by instinct rather than measuring, the way she tasted and adjusted with the confidence that came from years of practice. There was something almost meditative about her movements, a rhythm that seemed to slow down the frantic pace of his thoughts. She placed a simple plate before him, scrambled eggs with herbs, thick-cut bacon, and what looked like homemade bread still warm from the oven. Nothing fancy or elaborate, just breakfast food elevated by obvious care and attention to detail. "What kind of bread is this?" Marcus asked before he could stop himself. Sophia glanced up, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Pain. De campagne. Country bread. My grandmother used to make it every Sunday morning. Said it was the foundation of any good meal. Simple ingredients, but the technique makes all the difference." Marcus took a bite, and again felt that strange stirring of recognition. The bread was exactly the right balance of crusty exterior and tender crumb, with a subtle tang that spoke of natural fermentation and patient timing. "Sarah tried to make bread once," he said quietly, the words escaping before he could censor them. "It was not successful. She turned the kitchen into a disaster zone and ended up ordering pizza instead." Sophia continued cooking, her expression carefully neutral. "Bread can be temperamental. It requires patience and practice, two things that are hard to come by in our busy world." Marcus finished his breakfast in silence, surprised to realize he'd eaten every bite. For the first time in years, food had actually tasted like something worth savoring rather than mere sustenance. Over the following days, a subtle routine developed. Sophia would arrive early, moving through the kitchen with quiet efficiency. Marcus would appear at his designated mealtimes, and while he maintained his rule about minimal conversation, he found himself asking occasional questions about techniques or ingredients. Each meal was a revelation. Sophia didn't cook complicated dishes designed to impress. Instead, she prepared simple, honest food that somehow managed to be extraordinary. A perfect risotto that transported him to a restaurant in Venice where he'd honeymooned with Sarah. Lamb chops, seasoned with herbs that reminded him of their anniversary dinner at a small bistro in Provence. Each dish seemed designed not to overwhelm but to gently coax his dormant emotions back to life. But it was her soups that nearly undid him completely. On a particularly cold February morning, Marcus entered the kitchen to find Sophia ladling something into a bowl, the steam carrying an aroma that stopped him in his tracks. Chicken soup. But not just any chicken soup. This was the exact recipe Sarah had made when Emma was sick with the flu. The same combination of herbs and vegetables that had filled their home with comfort and warmth. His hands shook as he lifted the spoon, and when he tasted it, the years collapsed like dominoes. He could see Emma curled up on the couch in her favorite purple pajamas, Sarah fussing over her temperature while the soup simmered on the stove. He could hear their voices, feel the weight of his daughter's small body as she fell asleep against his chest while he read her stories. "How do you do it?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "How do you know exactly what I need to remember?" Sophia sat across from him at the island, her own bowl of soup growing cold. "I don't plan it, Mr. Blackwell. I just cook what feels right, and somehow the recipes seem to know what you need to hear." "They're gone," Marcus said suddenly, the words tearing out of him like shrapnel. "My wife and daughter. 20 years ago. Car accident on the way to Emma's piano recital. I was supposed to be with them, but I had a board meeting that couldn't wait. I chose work over my family, and they died because of it." Sophia reached across the counter and placed her hand gently over his. "They died because accidents happen, Mr. Blackwell. Not because you weren't there." "You don't understand," Marcus continued, the dam finally breaking after 2 decades. "Sarah had been asking me to cut back on work, to spend more time at home. Emma was only 8, and she kept asking why Daddy was never around for her school plays or soccer games. I kept promising I'd change, but there was always another deal, another acquisition, another meeting that couldn't wait." "What was Emma's favorite food?" Sophia asked quietly. Marcus looked up, surprised by the question. "Chocolate chip pancakes. Every Saturday morning she'd wake us up at dawn demanding pancakes shaped like animals. Sarah was terrible at making them look like anything recognizable, but Emma would pretend they were perfect elephants or butterflies anyway." "Tell me about Sarah." She was everything I'm not. Patient, kind, able to find joy in the smallest things. She could make anyone feel welcome, could turn the simplest meal into a celebration. She tried to teach me to cook once, said it was important to know how to take care of the people you love. I was too busy to pay attention." Sophia stood and moved to the stove, beginning to gather ingredients. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked. Making pancakes, she replied simply. Chocolate chip in the shape of animals. It's not Saturday. No, Sophia agreed, mixing batter with practiced ease. But grief doesn't follow a schedule, and neither does healing. As she cooked, Marcus found himself talking, really talking, for the first time in 20 years. He told her about Emma's gap-toothed smile, about Sarah's terrible attempts at gardening, about the life they'd planned to build together that had ended in a single moment of twisted metal and shattered glass. Sophia listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions that helped him access memories he'd thought were lost forever. When she placed the pancakes before him, perfectly shaped like a butterfly and an elephant, Marcus broke down completely, sobbing like the broken man he'd hidden beneath decades of success and isolation. I miss them so much, he whispered. Every single day I miss them. I know, Sophia said, sitting beside him, but missing them means you love them, and love like that doesn't disappear just because they're gone. It transforms, but it endures. Over the following weeks, something fundamental shifted in Marcus's world. He began looking forward to meals not just for the food, but for the gentle conversations that accompanied them. Sophia had a gift for drawing out memories without pushing, for creating space where his grief could exist alongside moments of unexpected joy. She told him about her own losses, parents she barely remembered, a grandmother who had raised her with fierce love and endless stories. She spoke of learning to cook as a way of staying connected to the people who had shaped her, of how every dish was a form of prayer, a way of keeping love alive through the simple act of nourishing others. My grandmother always said that cooking, for someone, was the most intimate thing you could do, Sophia told him one evening, as she prepared what had become his favorite dish, her grandmother's coq au vin. You're taking raw ingredients and transforming them into something that will literally become part of them. It's alchemy, but it's also love made tangible. Marcus watched her hands as she worked, noting the unconscious grace in her movements, the way she tasted, and adjusted seasoning with the confidence of generations of knowledge passed down through touch and intuition. Do you think they would approve? He asked quietly. Sarah and Emma, do you think they'd want me to be happy again? Sophia turned from the stove, her eyes soft with understanding. What do you think, Marcus? It was the first time she'd used his first name, and somehow that small intimacy felt like crossing a bridge he hadn't known he was ready to cross. Sarah always said that love multiplies when you share it, that there was no limit to how much joy one heart could hold, he said slowly. She'd be furious if she knew I'd spent 20 years punishing myself for surviving when they didn't. And Emma? Marcus smiled, actually smiled, for the first time in decades. Emma would want me to be happy. She was 8 years old and believed that every problem could be solved with enough chocolate chip pancakes and butterfly kisses. That night, after Sophia had gone home to her small apartment in Queens, Marcus climbed the stairs to the rooms he hadn't entered since the accident. Sarah and Emma's belongings were exactly as they'd left them, preserved like a shrine to his inability to let go. But instead of the crushing weight of grief he usually felt in these spaces, Marcus found himself remembering not just the tragedy of their loss, but the beauty of their lives. Emma's art project still taped to her bedroom walls, filled with rainbow colors and boundless imagination. Sarah's half-finished novel on her nightstand, the pages filled with the humor and insight that had made him fall in love with her mind as much as her heart. For the first time in 20 years, Marcus began to pack their belongings not out of a desire to forget, but out of a need to honor their memory in a way that allowed for the possibility of future happiness. The next morning, he surprised Sophia by appearing in the kitchen an hour early, carrying a small wooden box. These were Sarah's grandmother's recipe cards, he said, placing the box on the counter. I thought maybe you'd like to see them, to compare with your grandmother's techniques. Sophia opened the box with reverent hands, her eyes widening as she examined the faded index cards covered in spidery handwriting. These are incredible, Marcus. Look at this. She has variations I've never seen, little notes about adapting, ingredients based on the seasons. Sarah used to say that her grandmother could make a feast out of nothing, that she had an intuitive understanding of how flavors work together. Marcus said she tried to teach Sarah, but Sarah was always too impatient to learn properly. Would you like me to cook from these? Sophia asked, to help you remember more about her family? Marcus nodded, his throat tight with emotion. I'd like that very much. Over the following days, Sophia worked her way through Marie Dubois' recipe collection, each dish revealing new layers of family history and tradition. Marcus found himself sharing stories not just about his own family, but about Sarah's memories of her grandmother, the woman who had shaped his wife's understanding of how food could be an expression of love. But the true breakthrough came on a Sunday evening in March, when Sophia prepared a dish that didn't appear in either grandmother's recipe collection, something entirely her own creation. It's a ragu, she explained, stirring the sauce that had been simmering for hours. But I've combined techniques from both grandmothers, along with some things I've learned on my own. I wanted to create something that honored the past while looking toward the future. The dish was extraordinary. Complex layers of flavor that spoke of tradition and innovation in equal measure. As Marcus tasted it, he realized that this was what healing looked like, not forgetting the past, but allowing it to inform a future that remained open to new possibilities. Sophia, he said quietly, setting down his fork. I need to tell you something. She looked up from her own plate, her expression calm but attentive. When you first walked into this kitchen, I was dead inside. Not metaphorically, literally dead to everything that makes life worth living. I thought that was just how things would be for the rest of my life. That numbness was the price I had to pay for surviving when my family didn't. And now? She asked softly. Now I remember what it feels like to be alive. To taste food and actually experience pleasure. To think about tomorrow with something other than dread. He paused, gathering courage for what he needed to say next. I've been hiding from life for 20 years, but you've shown me that it's possible to honor the dead while still choosing to live. Sophia reached across the table and took his hand. What are you saying, Marcus? I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you, he admitted, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. I know it's complicated. I know I come with more baggage than any reasonable person should be expected to carry. But for the first time since I lost them, I can imagine a future that includes happiness. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of his hand. I've been waiting my whole life for someone to cook for who truly understands that food is love made tangible, she finally said. Someone who appreciates not just the flavors, but the story behind every dish. Is that a yes? Marcus asked, hardly daring to breathe. That's a yes to whatever this becomes, Sophia replied, her smile brighter than any sunset he'd ever seen from his penthouse windows. But I should warn you, I come with my own complications. I talk to my grandmother's ghost while I cook, I cry over perfectly good onions, and I believe that every meal should be a small celebration. Marcus laughed, actually laughed, the sound rusty from disuse, but genuine. I think I can live with that. 6 months later, Marcus Blackwell's penthouse kitchen had been transformed from a sterile showpiece into the warm heart of a home. The walls were covered with handwritten recipes, family photos, and Emma's artwork, carefully preserved and lovingly displayed. The massive dining table that had sat empty for 20 years now hosted regular dinner parties for the small group of friends and colleagues who had watched Marcus emerge from his decades of isolation with wonder and relief. But the most significant change was harder to quantify. It lived in the way Marcus's eyes lit up when Sophia entered a room, in the easy comfort of their shared rhythms around the kitchen, and the knowledge that love, like the best recipes, could be rebuilt from simple ingredients and infinite patience. On their wedding day, they served a feast prepared entirely from their grandmother's recipes, dishes that carried the weight of history and the promise of new traditions yet to be created. As Marcus lifted his glass to toast his new wife, surrounded by the family they'd chosen and the family they planned to build together, he felt Sarah and Emma's presence not as ghosts haunting his happiness, but as blessings on the life he'd finally found the courage to live again. To Sophia, he said, his voice strong and clear, who taught me that the best recipes aren't just about ingredients and technique, they're about love, loss, memory, and hope, who showed me that it's possible to honor the past while embracing the future, one meal at a time. As they kissed beneath the same kitchen lights where their love story had begun, Marcus tasted not just the salt of happy tears, but the flavor of possibility itself, as complex and nourishing as any dish Sophia had ever created, and as enduring as the love that had brought them together across time, loss, and the mysterious alchemy of two hearts, learning to beat in perfect rhythm once again.